Well, it's been a long time coming, but finally the time has arrived. The eagerly awaited cinematic event of 2022 is finally here, with its auteur creator back from a seemingly endless hiatus. This time, he has a whole new technological setup and is ready to please his many adoring fans with good movie content. But enough about my return to YouTube. Let's talk about Avatar 2. Now, if you're over the age of 5 and have half a brain cell, I'm sure you remember the colossal hit that was Avatar. This thing opened like gangbusters back in 2009 and introduced audiences everywhere to the beautiful world of Pandora. It also introduced them to a mineral that is unable to be obtained, wisely called unobtainium. Avatar: The Way of Water takes place years after the first film, with Jake Sully fully integrated with the Na'vi. He settled down with Neytiri, and the two of them have left their warrior ways behind to raise a family. But their time of bliss soon comes to an end, as those dastardly humans have come back, only this time with both a bigger armory and a bigger goal in mind. Their arrival also brings forth an old adversary, which forces Jake and his family to flee their forest home. But because this is a James Cameron movie, they decide to hide out in a place that is absolutely obsessed with water. Now, a little bit of personal history regarding me with the first film. I saw this thing when I was on the younger side. No, not that young. Yep, that's more like it. I remember being completely immersed in the film with all of its cool visuals, but not so much its story. I know it's the cool thing to crap on it and say it's the worst thing to happen to mankind since bagpipes, but it's good despite the dialogue. So, nothing's over while I'm breathing. But I still think it's a fun experience that's held up remarkably well over the years. That leads us nicely to its sequel, the much anticipated Avatar 2: The Way of Water, a movie I had mild hope for. The trailers kept a lot of the specific plot details vague, but showcased just a hint of the cool visuals that were in store. And I was definitely turned off by the whole announcement that this is going to be a sequel that'll lead into multiple sequels, 6 Avatar movies. But despite all of that, I've got to say, it was truly a spectacle to behold. I've heard a lot of people comment on the long gap of time between movies, but it actually makes sense when you realize how much of a perfectionist director James Cameron really is. You can say a lot about the guy. I hear he's a bit of a jerk, but you can't help but admire the sheer force of will he dedicates to making sure his movies are as technically perfect as possible. I actually saw this thing in IMAX 3D, which I normally don't do, but the situation demanded it. The only technical thing that bugged me about the movie is the higher frame rate. Most films you see today are filmed at around 24 frames per second, but this one was filmed at around 48. If you're unfamiliar, this is around the same frame rate that comes with your new HD TV whenever you buy it from the store. You know, the annoying soap opera quality that you almost immediately turn off. The movie does it in the best way I've seen, but I still don't care for it. It's especially jarring during some of the flying sequences, which paired with the 3D format, made my eyes feel like they were going through a kaleidoscope. But enough gushing about the visuals, let's get down to the story, which is often the most widely criticized aspect of these movies. As you can probably tell by the title, Avatar 2 follows a lot of the same tropes the director has followed in the past. You've got heroes on the run, a heavy-handed environmental message, heroes torn between their more violent side and the family they've created, and water. So much water. But I've got to say, I found myself enjoying this story more than the one in the previous film. The decision to focus almost entirely on the family set up by Jake Sully and Neytiri was a bold move, but it ultimately paid off. All of the children are decently fleshed out and have their own trials that they're struggling with over the course of the movie. And by the end, you feel like the journey they've experienced has really changed them. There was one kid specifically whose subplot felt a bit rushed, and out of every subplot in this movie, you can tell this was definitely the one that was most used to set up for a possible sequel. But again, I quite enjoyed seeing the kids grow. Now, while I did think the children were pretty fleshed out, the decision to focus on them left other characters feeling sidelined, namely Neytiri. She was my favorite part of Avatar 1, and now she's taken on more of a caregiver type role. That is, of course, until the final battle, where she goes absolutely beast mode. And speaking of beast mode, let's give a special shout out to Stephen Lang. This guy went from a generic cookie cutter military bad guy to, well, okay, he's still a generic military bad guy, but the writers took his character in a direction I honestly wasn't expecting. He's got a bit more depth this time around, and without delving too deep into spoiler territory, the theme of family extends to him as well. There's an interesting dynamic set up between him and another character that was one of my favorite aspects of the whole movie. Overall, there are definitely higher emotional stakes all around, which helps the sequel stand higher than its predecessor. Then there's the runtime, and I was quite proud that my child-sized bladder was able to withhold the 3-hour length. I do think you could have cut a good 25-minute chunk out of this thing and it would still feel coherent, and the first act was a bit choppy, especially in the way it has to cover a lot of ground and catching the audience up to the action. In the last movie, Jake Sully had to record audio logs for the purposes of the Avatar experiment, which gave the audience through the exposition in a very natural way. Here, there are no audio logs he has to do, so all of his narration just feels a bit out of place. It's especially apparent later on in the movie, where the voiceover just comes out of nowhere to catch us up on random time jumps that occur. There was a handful of moments where I was like, oh wait, this person has a kid now? Oh, okay. You can tell James Cameron wanted to rush through certain segments to just get to the scenes where characters are exploring the world around them. I honestly don't know how some of this stuff was filmed, and I can see why it took him 10 years to make. The best way I can describe how watching this movie feels is to imagine you're sitting down and binge watching all 8 episodes of a show's season. The story is basically broken up in different segments where a new goal must be achieved, and ultimately builds to a grand climactic finale. And oh boy, is this finale climactic. It's a whole visual smorgasbord of fire, water, and destruction. It's pretty great to just turn off your critical thinking and let your lizard brain enjoy the carnage. But while the action is exciting, there is an entire segment of this battle that bugged me. Now I know it's an unstated rule to never bring up Batman vs. Superman on the internet, but I couldn't help but get major Lois Lane Kryptonite Spear vibes at a certain point. The protagonists keep leaving then returning to the same location about 5 times over the course of 15 minutes, and it gets a bit mind-numbing. So in conclusion, would I recommend seeing this 3-hour CGI fest? Yeah, actually I would. Avatar 2 definitely has its fair share of problems, particularly in the way it handles its story, but I did enjoy it more than the first one. It was a great theatrical experience, so much so that on the way out of the theater, I actually heard a little kid say, "Wow, that was actually a fun time at the movies." Now, is there a decent chance that kid's probably going to forget about it within 10 minutes to ask for a Happy Meal? Probably, but what he said really stuck with me, and that is you don't really get movies like this anymore. Hollywood used to crank out a dozen of these things a year, and now they just don't. Now it's just all Marvel movies. And don't get me wrong, do love a good Marvel superhero flick, but every now and then it's great to just see a new experience that transcends the art of the screen. So overall, I quite enjoyed Avatar: The Way of Water. Definitely a great theatrical experience despite being bogged down by its length and some little story issues. I'm going to give this movie a B. But hey, I'm just a humble movie critic on YouTube. What did you guys think? Did you like Avatar: The Way of Water? And does it in any way make you excited for Avatars 2, 3, 4, and 5? Comment below and let me know.